speech in the reply to the President's address in Parliament, where he spoke about how private capital and private industry should not be put down, and how babus should not be running businesses. And then your budget also had a lot of, if I can say so, industry-friendly features. And you're going big on disinvestment. You're going to sell your public assets, asset monetization. So the question that I want to ask is there finally are we seeing the BJP government coming into its own in terms of its philosophy of being pro-wealth, pro-business, and in the hope that it will lift up the economy and all boats? Instead of the last 6 years, we have seen a government which is following Congress plus philosophy of giving out doles, entitlements-based approach. Are we seeing a fundamental shift in governance?
Fundamental shift in governance has already started significantly happening between 2004 and 19, and we continue it even now. Shift in governance is now so focused on delivery, the last mile connectivity, simplifying administrative and regulatory compliances, keeping government at arm's length from many of those institutions which had got otherwise very murkied. So emphasis on governance has already started full force since after 2014. As regards ideologically coming to its own, I don't think we were far removed from the ideological core, whether under Atal Bihari Vajpayee or even earlier, and the party's ideological base remains the same. Between 14 and 19, there were definitely difficulties because of the numbers in the upper house. Now, not only is your number in the lower house improved, even in the upper house you are in a better position. That certainly smoothens the passage for any kind of reform you want to undertake. And reform is not just the activity derived from your ideological commitments. Reform is a necessity for your ideological commitment, because this country had gone too far in reiterating its position repeatedly on the socialist and what I would say, and imported what I would say again as a Jugaad ideology. Jugaad as in something which you partly brought in from somewhere else, something into which you kept tweaking, something into which you kept adding on, thinking that that's necessary for India. But it only skewed the system so badly against businesses that a regulatory rigidity set in, a certain level of discretion, which no longer was discretion, which was rampant, of subjectivity and choices and preferences which were not based on rules. So this so-called welfare state socialism degenerated to becoming a very rigid, regulatory, arbitrary towards businesses. That's where I think this budget stands out distinctly, because many of those what was held as a sacred cow, if I may use that expression. No, you don't touch certain things, because that's the inheritance of this country's socialism. And socialism is good only because it talks of public good. Public good is no copyright of socialism. Ideologies which are other than socialism also spoke about public good and executed public good to a certain extent. But if the economy per se doesn't do well, and wealth does not get generated, then public good also suffers. Welfare state also suffers. So pretending that welfare state means the opposite of public wealth creation doesn't add up. So we've called that game out, that bluff out, in a way, by reiterating the commitment to respect wealth creators. Due lawful earning of money is wrong, not wrong. And therefore, through that, with a tax regime which is not going to be oppressive, which is not going to be adversarial, we should be able to generate enough revenues with which the public good, whether for farmers, whether for the Dalits, whether for the poor, whether for the dispossessed, will all be taken care of. That's the message of this budget.
You said that deficit this year will be 9.5, next year 6.8, and it may not come back below 4.5 even by FY26. So, and subsequent interviews also have shown that you feel that the FRBM 3% target is not, there is nothing very sacrosanct about the 3% number. So, if you're not going to target the fiscal deficit number specifically, what else are you going to target in order to keep the overall debt at a manageable level? Because the real problem I feel is that interest costs take away a very large proportion of the revenue receipts, which is the real problem. Like even a household in a debt trap, basically it is the interest servicing that is the problem. So, if it is not going to be fiscal deficit, what is going to be the debt indicator that you're going to target?
This year, I think I don't have the luxury of talking about the debt indicators. I don't have the luxury of talking about debt to GDP ratio. But of course, I have the comfort that the interest rates are coming down. I have remained fairly low. And also, to that extent, I must appreciate the role the RBI has played, as a result of which, and also because continuously there's been this running engagement with the RBI on specifics of how they or we would want to handle. Therefore, this has kept the bond yields in an acceptable level. And that is why even in the GST compensation issue, when the discussions were in the council about how are we going to manage this, we had a certain confidence at the back of our minds to say we will arrange for back-to-back loans for the states and at a reasonable level. If only we had left it to the states to go running for the borrowing, the yields could have been different. Yields could have really shot up, and end of the day it would have meant that the states didn't have parity in treatment. After all, compensation is based on a formula. But when the compensation is not being provided, and if states have to borrow for it, which is the only way we had, all of us had to borrow. But within that borrowing, if each state had to end up servicing it at different levels, it would have brought in a certain discord. And that is where I think the RBI, working at tandem with us, has provided that comfort. And that comfort is also the comfort on which I'll probably be playing up a bit this year, so that the borrowing and the activities of capital expenditure gets carried on smoothly. However, to the pointed question of how are you going to target and what is it that you're going to target, I think this year I'll not so much apply my mind on that. I'd rather be concentrating myself on executing everything that has been said in the budget in a timely manner, so that the benefits of these steps actually are felt in the ground. Otherwise, the revival is not going to be fueled. So that's where we are.
But rates are now, yesterday also an auction devolved on primary dealers. The rates are now shooting up. 6.17 was day before yesterday. So what is the level, you must be having a mental assessment of this level I'm comfortable with, 6.2, 6.1. Is there any such?
No, I don't think we are spending much time on detailing that out, because I think the RBI is very communicative with us on this, and we are taking it as it comes. So I also realize by my saying that this is the kind of level we'll be comfortable with is itself a suggestion to the market.
Yes.
And I wouldn't want to do that.
From the BPCL, Air India cases, I see that a lot of homework has been done on what has gone wrong with the previous set of sales, and therefore there is a move to actually commence the valuation exercise much ahead. and also strip out some assets like land and real estate and do it separately, which bundling doesn't get you the full value. So this being the case, why has there been a delay in this BPCL Air India sales? Is it a function of the global environment and too few bidders coming in, or what is the reason?
No, we've had reasonable number of bidders in both the cases. But I think the ground realities between, let's say, the election of 19, then the economy, then the global economy slowing down, and then you still have a reasonable check and balance in the system of the bureaucracy forewarning you, will you be able to get that kind of return, and then you also have this thing of let us get it right. So what exactly is that right? All this consumes time, and naturally, because ultimately all of us will have to stand up in the parliament and speak, everybody wants to tick every box right. That naturally results in a lot of time being spent on those things which are not visible outside, and therefore this question arises saying, why does it take so much time? I don't want to simplify it by saying even within families you want to sell a house, sentiment, after all that's a lived in place, why do you want to do it? Similar is the sentiment, chemistry, getting it right, you don't want to be at the loser's end. Everything governs in government.
While on disinvestment, this 1.75 lakh crores, considering that you have LIC IPO lined up, and there are estimates in the market already that even if you sell 10% of LIC, you'll get about 70,000 crores at least. Is your estimate very conservative? Is there an upside to it which is possible? This 1.75 lakh.
No, we've been very realistic about reaching numbers which add up, both from the point of view of perception and from the point of view of what you can achieve. I've been very clearly cautious on that ground. In fact, on the disinvestment numbers, till the last we were just keeping pencil and eraser, to remove, add, put it in and so on, only because we this time didn't want anything in the budget, any one thing in the budget, to appear as though there's been a little carelessness there, or a little ambition there, or little overestimation here. So every one of them have been repeatedly checked for being real and achievable, rather than your ambition showing we want more, or your ambition saying it's possible. So this is more a budget which has been thrashed repeatedly only to get it closer to reality and that which can be achievable. So yes, it can appear an underestimate. Yes, it can be too cautious, but I'd rather be cautious than stand up and say yes, I went wrong.
I had a question on this scrappage policy for vehicles. Like for many budgets, it was expected and was announced at this point of time. But it also came when a few days earlier a green tax was announced, and it was a percentage of road tax or whatever. So I'd like to know what kind of an outgo you are expecting, because it involves giving GST incentives or compensating manufacturers for discounts. So is the centre, since the state governments are going to impose the green tax and also, is the centre looking at kind of sharing the outgo with the states for this scrappage scheme, or is it only going to be
I don't think the final details are before me yet. But per se, I think we have definitely gone through the process of how this is going to get executed. And to create the necessary infrastructure at different district levels, let's say. I don't know if they are at this moment thinking of going beyond that to the tehsils and all that. So that is one aspect, and that is why I think even though this was announced, it will probably take the next month or a couple of weeks before it can be in the ground executed. That's one side. Second, I think the government's approach in any one of these matters is fairly holistic, in that the environment part of it, the air and the metal pollution, and also the like the way they go about breaking the ships in a particular region in Alang. Every district is now going to have a area which is designated for handling materials which are decomposed partly or whatever. So they are looking at it in that kind of a way, rather than at this stage possibly looking at what would it mean in terms of devolution, sharing of revenue. That will fall in place, but they are also now wanting to make sure that it's not going to bring in newer problems by having a state center approach in handling this. So as regards the sharing, it will come out gradually.
This is a question on cess. You have there's already a lot of cess on petroleum products and several other education cess, and you have added a new one, agriculture cess. Now the feeling among states is that the center is by adding more and more cesses, as it is enough, and you add more, you're depriving them of their justified revenues, because cess goes entirely to the Consolidated Fund of India. So the question is it fair to go on adding cesses which don't devolve on states?
Whilst working this particular one, we had spent a lot of time on the idea of the cess itself. Yes, it goes to the consolidated fund. Yes, it doesn't get shared between the center and states. All that is given. We were only making sure that there should be some dedicated fund for improving agri-infra. Second, we were very clear that agri-infra, whenever you want to do anything on it, will have only to go to the states. Center is not going to be able to do any infra in the ground level improvement, because no APMC is with the center. So that itself answered this question of, even if it's a cess, in this particular case, it has to go to the states only. So you answered one question for yourself. Second, and on a different plane, we wanted to bring down the customs duties. Although we are talking of Atmanirbhar Bharat, we also wanted to open up on good imports which are necessary, and that import which is necessary for your downstream industries, and that import which is going to help them to produce to export. We wanted to reduce the customs duty. But whilst doing that, we also thought, if there is a possibility of taking what is being carved out from the by the reduction of the customs duty, if there is a possibility for us to get something for this agri-infra, retaining it as customs duty itself and taking a complete carve-out for it was not going to be possible per the rules of business, because every customs duty goes to the consolidated fund, and once it goes into the consolidated fund, you will have to create a head or propose a new scheme or go to the parliament as regards a particular program that you want to do, which I am not averse to. But that becomes another exercise altogether. Instead, what we said was, when the customs duty is being reduced, not entirely to the proportionate to the reduction, but a part of it, so that end of the day, the relief for the importer should be felt. At the same time, what is taken away from him, at least a part of it, if it can go for the infrastructure, we should use it. So the instrument was cess, but the method of operating this cess is not the way it is, because it is not just being given off to the center's consolidated fund, but immediately after going to the consolidated fund, to that extent of what has been carved out from this reduction in customs duty will be given to the states for improving infra. So it is a cess, nevertheless, because of the intent, it goes only to the states.
But what about the philosophical question of cesses itself? Will you?
No, I agree. Cess itself generates this feeling that it's all, and rightly, it's all in the hands of the center. What has to come to the states is getting reduced. That is not disputed.
So on bank privatization, this is the first time the word privatization must have been used in the budget. And it's good that you're starting slow with the two banks that you mentioned. So, is there a thought process on what will be the approach? I mean, one approach could be that the public sector banks that have been strengthened significantly last year through mergers and have become very big, those can be privatized. The other thinking can be that the smaller banks, the ones which are in a weaker financial position, still need recapitalization, those can be privatized. So, which of the courses of action would you like to?
I don't think it goes in these sort of
Okay.
pathways.
Okay.
We want all the banks to become professionally run. We are making sure that all of them come out of the PCA. They should stand out and say, now we run the banks for professional performances. And surely, at least in the last 6 years, it's been proven that we don't interfere in their day-to-day decision making. So I expect the banks to be able to clearly stand out and say, this is where we are. And of course, if it's public sector bank, it's the government which decides what to do with them next. So we've not formulated on, oh, we sell the not profit making one, we don't sell the big one. None of that decision has been made at all. But my drive is to make them professional. My drive is to make them build on their strengths so that India within the next few years is able to have solid, good banks, big banks, which can meet the demands of the growing India. And that is where, together with the development financial institution that we are building from the government side, and also opening up opportunity for development financial institution, the private sector, the long-term project funding, infrastructure building can be taken care of by them. Then the bank should get back to the core business of lending and making money out of it and lending again, rather than get choked by this, I've borrowed short term, but I'm lending long term, my money circulation. We don't want that happening. Clearly, there should be a marked difference in your portfolios compared to what a DFI should be doing, and that DFI will be executed soonest possible, so that the burden and the demand from the economy for funding infra, for funding projects will have to happen through them, both in the public and the private. And banks should be doing pure banking activity.
Would we need any legislation for this DFI to be created?
At least, I don't think for the DFI I need a legislation. But the IDBI needs a little bit of a tweaking, because it needs a license, ironically, to be called a bank now. After it having existed for this many number of years, it is going to be given the banking license now.
I had a question on the EPF. What is the long-term plan? Because, last few budgets we've seen some tweaks, and as early as 2015 it was announced that we'll have a plan to migrate from EPF to corporate NPS. But today, if you see corporate NPS, hardly 11 lakh subscribers are there. Substantially move from the EPF to corporate NPS doesn't seem to have happened. So, what is the long-term plan on this front? So, is the EPF going to be only for people earning below 15,000, which is the cutoff?
Well, even now, what we have taken as a call is not to discourage people from being a part of EPF, those who earn more than 15,000. But I also will not have to be looking the other way if people who are having a double benefit from it, who don't belong to the 15,000 or less category, or even 15,000 and slightly more category. If there are instances of people putting 1 crore a month who get tax benefit, who also get tax benefit when they draw it, whenever they draw it, and get an assured interest. I want to make sure that without hurting those who are in the EPF, I also will have to recognize those who are getting the double benefit, assured interest, but also tax exemption. E. How justified is it? I'm talking like a socialist, but that's the truth.
But then, madam, if 1 crore is the problem, why set the limit at 2,50,000 then?
No, there can always be a discussion on the limit. Why 2.5? Can it not be more, and so on. But those who are putting far more than what an average Indian's earnings is per month, and that is about a percentage, only 1% of the total. We've only touched them. This is where India's socialistic sympathies come back to me to say, why are you worried if I'm touching the big guys? Why are you all so affected if I touch only those who can have that kind of a dispensable income? But they're smart. They have that much of dispensable income which they want to put somewhere, which gives them a assured return, but also get the tax benefit. You remain there, put that money, earn that assured income, but pay me some tax. What's wrong? What's wrong in asking that?
But I have to respectfully disagree with you here a little bit, man. If it's just that 1 crore, 1%, I'm okay with it. But your move is touching even people like me who are way down the pecking order.
No, that is why I said, whether it's 2.5 lakhs or more or whatever, is all right. That's agreeably discussable. I can also go back and review it, maybe raise it from 2.5 to something else. But the principle behind it,
No, the principle is not.
that's what we've touched.
Other thing is also, people are not as much worried about this move, those who are not affected. They are worried about what might come.
No, I know your question.
That is
I know your
the-
question touches on a larger issue.
yes.
What is it that we are planning for the EPF itself? Do you want to keep going, or do you want to blend it into NPS, or do you want to call it,
yeah.
or you,
Anyway, you
no.
have the stock market exposure here, so choose an
No,
ETF.
no, we don't. We want to continue with the EPF. We understand that there is a certain comfort when people, particularly middle income earners, when they are sure of a return. So that shall go on. That's my, at least, picture for EPF for the future. First of all, our position has not changed. We don't subscribe to any retrospective application of any tax. The simple black and white question which has been repeatedly asked of us is, then remove it. Remove that clarificatory amendment which was brought in 2012. Now, my predecessor onwards, the explanations given for us not touching it is that possibly because of the arbitrations which are going on. Now arbitrations have spoken. We very clearly said that amendment notwithstanding, we shall never apply this ever. But with the arbitration verdicts also coming, and some of the wordings of the operative part of the arbitration also indicate that there is a questioning of the sovereign right of India to tax. There is a subtlety here, but a very powerful subtle point. Can the right of a sovereign nation to tax somewhere get questioned even in an arbitration which probably says, no, this step was wrong? Which is what our Supreme Court also had said much before the amendment. So can they be embedded in a verdict, in a order which comes of a arbitration? Can they be embedded a question of India's taxation right itself? Which is what very many people were looking at, or very many taxation experts who are looking at the outcome of the arbitration are saying. Is there a question on India's sovereign right? And if it is even implied, it has to be stood up to. As a sovereign nation, no authority, be it arbitration, be it any other court, can question India's right. So on that, we are spending some time to understand, and that also probably justifies why we have gone for an appeal in Vodafone. On Cain, we have the Cain's top leadership who have met with the finance secretary. We'll have to now go and see what is it that they've come with as offer, and then address these issues. But the larger issue of why we have not rushed to remove that amendment of 2012, and the larger issue which governed in us going to an appeal on Vodafone, is governed by this fact that India's sovereign right can, even by implication or even in a circuitous fashion, cannot be questioned.
On personal income tax, last year there was a very important change brought in where people were allowed to opt for an exemption-free regime with a lower rate. And the existing system also continued. But from what tax experts tell us, not many people have opted for this alternative regime is what they say. I don't know if it's true. Is it true that fewer people have opted for it, and has there been some thought on what to iron out in terms of breaches?
No, these kind of changes which are coming as a simple, clear alternative to what is existing now will for several reasons take time to be acceptable. Why do I say that? That earlier existing, or before this option, the scheme which is existing, which continues to exist even now, is not a 1 year option. Yeah. It may have been given 1 year, added on to over several years, and therefore that entire structure has become such that it has a lifelong implication on one tax assessee, less than lifelong for somebody else, for the exemptions that they have utilized, and so on. So that structure now has panned itself out in such a way that everyone who has taken an option for that exemption and to benefit from it will have to wait till he exhausts that, and only then would he say the benefit of that particular exemption now is no longer relevant for me. I can move over to that other one which is simpler for compliance and better for the rate.
For instance, somebody who's taken a home loan.
So a citizen who is closer to his retirement would probably not any longer need that exemption because he's cleared his home loan. He can now opt to that. There could be some more such, so that exemption infused structure has various different incentive levels for different assessees. So I don't for a moment expect bulk movement from that to the newer system. It has to come in trickles, and gradually even this will have to be more and more attractive, so the transition is smoother. It's nobody's case that we want to upset any taxpayers' calculations. We want stability, and therefore that has to run its course. But nearer the course ending, maybe this would be very attractive, that movement can. So that's the way I would look at it.
And the budget had touched upon something called the investor charter and a common grievance redressal mechanism, but the modus operandi is not out yet. So is this some sort of a thing which is going to supersede all the existing grievance redressal bodies? Across insurance we have one, for banking there's one.
Yes, ideally that is the idea.
Yeah.
So that grievance itself is to be avoided. In the sense we should be providing a regime which has less of major grievances. Minor grievances can always be addressed through technology and many other things.
So is it coming out also because we are having newer problems? For example, the Franklin Templeton issue, where you actually don't know, like two, three bodies come into the picture there. So.
No, that's the point. So the grievance itself is something which I would want to handle. If it is minor, through technology, and major, we should be able to correct the systems that major grievance don't become too much or too frequent, for which we eventually want to have some way most of the regulators to come on board to have a single window kind of a mechanism through which you're able to touch one point where decisions will have to be made, regulators are on board, and therefore your grievance gets addressed there itself, rather than a major grievance, you go to X and then that's sorted out, but there is something which you were not fully seized of, a Y who has to do his role. We want to reduce that. And simplification is the process through which we want to take that up. So yes, in the long run, this grievance redressal should have to be simplified. Otherwise, that itself is a grievance.
Yes, for some products you don't even know who the regulator
That's
is
right.
in this digital lending act.
Yes, yes.
So you're worried whether it's RBI or something.
Yes, even consumer grievance, day-to-day grievances. You don't know whether you have to go to the consumer redressal program and then various. Yes, endless.
There was also a proposal in the budget to rationalize the SEBI Act, Government Securities Act, Securities Act, bring it all
Yes.
under an Indian securities
Yes,
code.
yes.
Is it linked to this or what?
It also has an implication on this ground, but even otherwise, the sophistication with which markets are operating increasingly, the acts are not nimble enough to handle it, and again the same issue, the multiplicity of the acts which have to be brought in. For each one of them there is a voluminous, reference manual. So we want to bring it all down as much as possible, and like the labor codes, 44 different, and then bring it all into one, took its own time. So that's exactly what we want to do in the securities also.
Is this also linked to the move to bring retail into the government securities market? Because so far what has happened is for retail investors, we hold our shares, bonds, etc. in a demat account, and that is controlled by SEBI. Whereas government securities, you operate through RBI and there's a separate money market system. So a person who wants to participate there needs to deal with two ecosystems, and it's quite cumbersome. So,
But there are two things that you're referring here, right? One, that the retail players and how they get regulated, and the other, why would a government security not be available for the retailer also in the same platform so you're dealing with two different issues. And one, of course, this has to be simplified, whether it is SEBI alone or anybody else. That's a totally different thing, and the robustness with which this retail thing is growing is astonishing.
Yes.
And the lockdown actually has given us one new area with a big torchlight hitting at that, saying look at the number of demat accounts which are getting opened. But in a way, I think RBI has moved one step forward to bring in retail players into the government securities, also keeping it distinctly separate as it is now. There's a lot of discussion happening between the SEBI and RBI on that. Even the ministry has also come in to say it will be definitely easier and also fair for the retail operators to come into the government securities. So can all this be brought under the same thing? Even we are also talking with the RBI on it, but that's going to be a time consuming thing, but it will happen. I hope eventually, because that's an area which belongs to RBI and I don't want to comment on it.
Well, this faceless assessment and penalty, all that. So is it being rushed through very quickly, because without seeing the results and the issues which taxpayers probably have, like, because faceless assessment was brought in only say 2 years ago, 2019.
But if taxpayers have a problem with it, I'm certainly willing to listen and hear and alter anything that which has to be changed. I don't think we are rushing any case, because we did a pilot of a certain number of taxpayers, and then we had the confidence that it can be scaled up. Therefore we scaled up, and therefore also then we said appeal 2 can come into this. But if it is only taxpayers' problem, I'm willing to hear it. But if there is a hesitation from the system itself to say should we do it now, I will only talk with them but not be able to give them more time. Because if officials, and I have the confidence and they've been repeatedly telling me that they're comfortable doing it, they're working at it, there's a lot of change in the deployment of the field forces has happened, and therefore I think the system is quite ready to take on. Because initially there was a lot of comments saying maybe the field forces themselves will not be ready, how are you moving? But now I can say with confidence, they have told me that they have settled into it, and the deployment of the field forces have really taken place smoothly. But if tax assessees have a problem, I'll certainly be ready to hear it, to change it, but I strongly, and this government strongly has a commitment that it is only technology which is going to give the comfort to the assessee, that personalized, one-on-one, discretion-based, sort of corruption-inducing kind of a approach will be completely out the moment you bring in technology. And for that very reason, we are committed.
On petroleum and diesel prices, no, petrol and diesel prices, why are you hesitant to drop duties at the center? You take away about 30-32 rupees per liter on petrol. Of course, states also have a huge share. They take 19-20 rupees per liter.
More than that.
We did the calculation. It comes to about maximum of 19-20 rupees a liter based on the highest state, which is the MP and Rajasthan. So, would you think of reducing prices, reducing the duties so that prices drop? It can also help you as a kind of a stimulus to
Spend.
the economy.
I like to say the usual platitudes. One, of course, it's not just the government, it is free, it's oil market companies, and so on. And the global prices since November are all going up. All those are there. But if the one objective that we want to accomplish is consumers should pay less, the burden on the consumer should be less, and if it is just that one objective, then just the center withdrawing is not going to help. Because I say this with due concern, because everyone wants revenue. It's not to look down upon states who want to have quick ways in which they would like to raise revenues. The space that I vacate, there's no guarantee that it will not get filled up. So if the end result is consumers should pay less, I would think it's both for the center and states to sit together and say how best we handle this.
Take it into GST, is that an option?
That will certainly bring in one rate, at least, for all over the country, whatever rate is.
Yeah.
And the GST Council can deliberate on it and take a position on it. But then the fact is, it is both the center and states, even there, right? After all, in the GST Council, it is both center and states. And the provision for the petroleum products has already been made in the GST law. It's zero rated.
Yeah.
It's not going to require much more legislative exercise. So we'll have to see how it goes. I really don't think with the good level of clarity I can speak on how the oil marketing companies price, and also how the oil marketing companies speak of under recoveries and over recoveries and everything else. That's an area in which the Petroleum Ministry will be far more competent to talk about.
So one final question before I let you go, madam. You spoke about a month before the budget about how this is a once in a 100-year budget, and it's not been ever this kind of circumstances, but it was misreported and it was turned around as this budget will be once in a 100-year budget. Now, were you nervous when you were formulating the budget that you should live up to these expectations, and were you nervous immediately after the speech was done on what is going to be the reaction? At any point, were you nervous?
I wasn't nervous when we were preparing it, because what we have to work within the available, stuff. I wasn't completely nervous at all. In fact, I wasn't nervous at all post the budget delivery of this budget. But after the cabinet had cleared it that morning, 10 o'clock, and post the cabinet, in that intermediate period, 11 o'clock is when the budget had to be read out in the parliament. 10 o'clock it gets cleared. 10 meaning 10 to 10:30, something like that. Those 30 minutes were very, very, very difficult. And because of the restrictions, no visitors were allowed. With due permission, just my father had come in. My uncle, who's my father who had brought me up, he was seated in one of the guest rooms in the parliament. I just very quickly went to him and I said, keep me in your prayers, I'm a bit... He was probably shocked to hear that from me, because he'd seen me preparing all the while. But I just went into that place where he was seated and said, keep me in your prayers, I'm feeling a bit queasy in my stomach. That's it.